She wants us.
Hello, Iron Disciples. Welcome back to podcast number 93, Matthew chapter 14. Getting into the Bible notes today, one of our favorite things, even though the audience, I don't think, probably finds it less interesting, but it's the most interesting part, is studying
Amen.
the Word.
That's right. You better find it interesting. Develop that interest now.
We're not talking about, doom and gloom relationship nonsense or the latest politics. We're going to talk about the Word.
Yeah, all you guys who lift weights, you know how it feels to chew on a piece of steak. Okay? You got to chew that up, and then it's awesome. You build your spiritual body stronger.
And we got producer Dave in the house.
How's it going, guys?
Joe's place.
Yes.
And
He's a scholar in his own right. Producer Dave.
yeah.
Yes, sir. It's good to have you, Dave.
It's good to be here.
It's good to have your face right up here next to mine.
It's great because Dave and our other buddy Connor are in a bench press competition right now.
Are you serious?
And
It's the first to hit 225.
No kidding.
yeah, they're working towards 225, and the loser has to wear a shirt around that's
Yeah. So if the first person to hit 225, then the loser has to wear a shirt that says "I can't bench 225."
Damn it.
And we have to wear it every day to the gym until you can hit 225. I'm kind of scared because Connor hit he hit 215 today.
yeah, he's
He hit
close.
215 today. Yeah.
Dude, I'll tell
He
you how
blew
you
my
win
mind
that.
today. He went from I think his last PR was 205 and then he went for 2 reps of 205.
He's
Yeah.
got some hidden strength, man. All you got to do is eat 4 double quarter pounders.
Right. Yeah.
Just nail those things the night before, pound that coffee, and then go in there and just will the beast that stuff.
I'll get it.
Wanna win.
That's for sure. I'll get it.
You got longer arms, so let's just be fair. Okay. You're a
Okay.
long, tall man. That means pushing that weight's going to be a little tougher. Connor's built more like a caveman, dude. He's straight up caveman style.
Hopefully Connor's watching.
Who did you make up? Connor, you're strong as F, dude. You got it, man. Both you guys. Not going to pick sides right now, but I'm just saying, David, you're like me. Got a lot more bar to push, man.
I'm just hearing
That's
way
that's
it
my
is.
excuse.
Yeah.
I'm just
a lot
hearing
more bar.
excuses right now.
Yeah. Anyway, so we got Matthew 14. Really excited to do this. Let's pull up the Bible. We're going to be reading the ESV if you guys want to follow along with us. We're going to read through the chapter first, and then we're going to dive into the notes.
All right. Matthew 14, the death of John the Baptist. At the time, Herod the Tetrarch heard about the fame of Jesus, and he said to his servants, "This is John the Baptist. He has been raised from the dead. That is why these miraculous powers are at work in him." For Herod had seized John and bound him and put him in prison for the sake of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, because John had been saying to him, "It's not lawful for you to have her." And though he had wanted to put him to death, he feared the people, because they held him to be a prophet. But when Herod's birthday came, the daughter of Herodias danced before the company and pleased Herod, so that he promised with an oath to give her whatever she might ask. Prompted by her mother, she said, "Give me the head of John the Baptist here on a platter." And the king was sorry, but because of his oath and the guests he commanded it to be given. He sent and had John beheaded in prison, and his head was brought on a platter and given to the girl.
Why is that
That's
funny?
so brutal. That's like, what? And brought it to her mother. And his disciples came and took the body and buried it, and they went and told Jesus. I just want to stop it. That's like the most ridiculous.
Man, back in the day, they had strippers too,
savage.
bro. They had their little ladies dancing in front of them, and gosh, man, just goes to show.
I wonder what
Lose your head
I wonder
over that.
How much of like an oath he would have held to? Like,
He
she's
made it
like,
in the court, so
I know,
everybody
yeah.
heard him. So it's like, all right, dude.
If she would have been like, "I want your head on a platter," then what?
You'd
Or
be
"I
like,
want your kingdom," then what?
I guess there's certain
I
oaths.
wonder if
that,
there's like, all right,
be like, you want me to kill myself, dude? Like, I'm sorry, I push back on
I
that
want
one.
your hand. How about that?
Cut your hand off.
Yeah.
I'd be like, okay,
Um,
we'll do that right after I cut your head off. Sound good? Let's do it.
Jesus feeds the 5,000. Now, when Jesus heard this, he withdrew from there in a boat to a desolate place by himself. But when the crowd heard it, they followed him on foot from the towns. When he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion on them and healed their sick. Now, when it was evening, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a desolate place, and the day is now over. Send the crowds away to go into the villages and buy food for themselves." But Jesus said, "They need not go away. You give them something to eat." They said to him, "We have only 5 loaves here and 2 fish." And he said, "Bring them here to me." Then he ordered the crowds to sit down on the grass, and taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and said a blessing. And then he broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the crowds. And they all ate and were satisfied. And they took up the 12 baskets full of the broken pieces left over. And those who ate were about 5,000 men, besides women and children.
Immediately he made the disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side, while he dismissed the crowds. And after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up on the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone, but the boat by this time was a long way from the land, beating by the waves, for the wind was against them. And in the 4th watch of the night he came to them walking on the sea. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified and said, "It is a ghost." And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." And Peter answered him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." He said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water and came to Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid. And beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." Jesus immediately reached out his hand and took hold of him, saying to him, "O you of little faith, why did you doubt?" And when he got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly you are the Son of God." And when they had crossed over, they came to land at Gennesaret. And when the men of that place recognized him, they sent around to all that region and brought to him all who were sick, and implored him that they might only touch the fringe of his garment. And as they touched it, were made well. As many who touched it were made well. All right. I wonder if that fish that Jesus made was better tasting than normal fish. The bread.
Was it seasoned?
Yeah, like some of the old people, like, it kind of tastes like manna, dude. Remember that? Yeah. It's that special God bread. All right,
It's like
chapter
catfish
14.
or halibut.
You know,
Sardines.
catfish has got to be the nastiest. So halibut would be actually pretty good. All right, chapter 14, folks. If you want to click on the link, you can pull up these notes and follow along with us. We're going to start the notes off with terms and people. So Herod Antipas. Herod means song of the hero. Antipas meaning for all or against all. Herod Antipas is referred to in the Bible as Herod the Tetrarch. Tetrarch meaning ruler of 1 quarter. After the death of Herod the Great, his kingdom was divided among 3 of his sons. Herod Antipas ruled over Galilee and Perea from 4 BC to 36 AD and was responsible for the death of John the Baptist. Herodias was daughter Aristobulus IV, one of Herod the Great's son. Herodias was wedded to Herod II, or Philip, as the Gospels call him, her half-uncle, by King Herod the Great. Herodias then divorced Herod II and married his half-brother Herod Antipas, her other half-uncle. She had 1 daughter with her first husband, Philip, named Salome. That is one heck of a hoe right there. Marrying uncles and just, wow, okie dokie. Salome means welcome peace. Though unnamed, Salome is the daughter of Herodias and Philip. Matthew tells us Salome danced so well for King Herod Antipas and his guests that he awarded her anything she asked, up to half his kingdom. Salome in turn asked for John the Baptist's head. Philip means lover of horses, mostly known in other historical texts as Herod II, though some writers refer to him as Herod Philip I. Philip was King Herod's son and for a brief time his heir apparent. Philip spent most of his life as a private citizen of Rome where he could escape being killed by his father, murdered, better. Gennesaret means garden of the prince. Gennesaret was known for its beauty and fertility. It is called the paradise of Galilee. The soil was rich like that of the Nile Delta. Its modern name is Il-Guhilwurnt. That's one heck of one thing. Added an
We
Ellen.
got Will in the chat. He said
Will.
he joined one heck of a hoe. I joined right at the right time. What's going on, Will?
Will, you know how our scholarly ways are different from most. We have to speak the words of the street to our lively guest. Nice to see you, Will. All right, I'm going to move on here. So Herod the Great, not so great family life. Look, we all know there is no perfect family. Even the best family units who strive to put God first go through experiences trying the deepest, most committed bonds. That's the way God made it. Family is hard work, but it is also one of the biggest rewards God has given us, both in our blood family and our spiritual family. Herod the Great was responsible for murdering one of his wives, exiling another, and murdering 3 of his sons. While this may sound profoundly awful, and it is, this kind of murderous treachery was relatively common among nobles and the ruling class. Fathers frequently would kill family members who threatened their throne, mothers, sons, daughters, aunts, uncles. No one was untouchable or beyond scrutiny for treachery. But this paranoia was not without grounds. As history shows, more often than not, family members of the king or queen would plot coups against their familial superiors. It was, in fact, the norm and expected. The title Great came from Herod's ambitious building projects, the most noteworthy of which was the rebuilding of the temple. Herod was a self-proclaimed Jew, though he was never accepted by the Jews as such. Historians will frequently credit this rejection to Herod being an Edomite, a race outside of Hebrew blood stock. But the truth is, the distaste for him came from his despotic, maniacal rule. Herod was a self-made man, the first of his bloodline to claim the throne. This is no small thing, and grasping this, one must assume he was a particularly able man in both making relations and keeping them. The road to kinghood is one of constant turmoil and resistance. Herod, though through his years and had mastered the ability to gain control and keep it, he did this through scare tactics, torture, and threats. People feared Herod. They did not love him. As a result, we can assume Herod's children were conditioned to behave in somewhat similar way. The paranoia stemming from endless talk of coups created a dynamic of mistrust, hate, and betrayal in Herod's family unit. Here's a breakdown of the events leading to John the Baptist's death. Herodias was wedded to her half-uncle Philip by her grandfather Herod the Great. She then divorced Philip in favor of Herod Antipas, her other half-uncle. In the midst of these two marriages, Herodias also had an affair with a step-uncle. Herodias and her uncles. Jeez.
That's one heck of a hoe.
That's one heck of a hoe with a thing for uncles. Dang. All right. That'll leave a mark. Okay. With this family dynamic, Satan was having a field day. For Satan, John the Baptist was the man standing in his way. In the opening chapter of Matthew 14, we see how Satan pulls the strings of these willing subjects using their hatred and jealousy to bring about the death of John. Herodias and her daughter Salome are the axemen Satan uses to kill John the Baptist. John, up to this point, was imprisoned, but strangely, Herod enjoyed John's company. Herod respected John as a prophet, despite John condemning his unlawful marriage to his brother's wife, Herodias. In this passage of Mark 6:17 through 19, we get a deeper look at how Herod viewed John the Baptist. Mark 6:17. For it was Herod who had sent and seized John and bound him in prison for the sake of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, because he had married her. For John had been saying to Herod, "It is not lawful for you to have your brother's wife." And Herodias had a grudge against him and wanted to put him to death. But she could not, for Herod feared John, knowing that he was a righteous and holy man, and he kept him safe. When he heard him, he was greatly perplexed, and yet he heard him gladly. Satan knew he could not affect Herod in a direct way to kill John. Instead, Satan uses Herodias and her daughter Salome to let the axe fall on John, thereby unwittingly pushing God's kingdom plan further down the road. Want to pick up, David?
Sure. Feeding the 5,000. Lessons for ministry. The feeding of the 5,000 is the only miracle, aside from the resurrection of Christ, recorded in all four Gospels. Must be important, right? But why is it worth repeating? Many scholars and teachers believe the feeding of the 5,000 is a key lesson in teaching what ministry is going to be like. With the kingdom offer now off the table, Jesus is focusing his efforts on teaching and preparing his disciples for ministry. It's boot camp time. Let's go. Here are some of the key points of training we can draw from this miracle. Number 1, feed and clothe the needy, especially in the desolate place. Obviously, ministry is going to take place where people need it. However, it's not always apparent what people need. As Christians, we know all people without Christ are spiritually desperate. That's their biggest problem. But their carnal needs, such as food, water, shelter, are important as well. In this miracle, Jesus calls us to serve people's spiritual needs and their carnal needs, and yes, even out of our lacking. That's right. When there seems to be no way to supply it, you give it. Think, only in those circumstances can we see God supernaturally provide. When we depend on God for the resources our faith grows. Through testing, we become stronger. This is God's way. Let's be real, though. No one is really excited about going through this kind of testing, but it's where we find growth, the spiritual gains.
Heck yeah.
So as the saying goes, if you talk the talk, you got to walk the walk. If you talk about faith, it will be tried. But when the math doesn't add up, or the how isn't clear, we walk by faith, knowing God is our how, and that he will come through perfectly, despite how we feel about the circumstances. Note, people have many different carnal and spiritual needs. Sure, there are the big four: salvation, water, food, and shelter. However, it requires spiritual sensitivity and prayer to discern what people truly need and lack, the deep stuff. Oftentimes, their needs will surprise you. Take, for example, when Jesus spoke with the Pharisees and the rich young ruler, he saw their deepest needs. The Pharisees' need for humility because of their haughty attitudes, and the rich young ruler's need for deprivation because of his overdependence on material excess. A need for material deprivation, humility? Those are weird to think about as needs, and even stranger to ponder how to help a person with those needs. Jesus saw their need for humility and warned them. Detecting and remedying these deeper needs may seem tricky, but remember who's in your corner. Jesus guided the disciples on how to fulfill the people's needs, providing food. He will do the same for us. We just have to listen and do the work. Do the work.
Do the work. Read your Bibles.
2, tired, hungry, cranky. Let's check out the state and condition of the disciples when they dealt with the 5,000. Mark 6:31. Then, because so many people were coming and going that they, the disciples, did not even have a chance to eat, he said to them, "Come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest." These dudes were tired and out of gas. Jesus saw this and said, "Let's take a break, boys. You need it." But the Father had other plans, and Jesus was keen to follow. John 5:19. So Jesus said to them, "Truly, truly, I say to you, the Son can do nothing of his own accord, but only what he sees the Father doing. For whatever the Father does, that the Son does likewise. The lesson was not over for the tired, hungry disciples. In fact, the lesson for how to serve was only half over. We know the disciples grew up under Pharisaic Judaism, so naturally they saw the Pharisees as their ministry role models. We can assume they perceived being part of Jesus' inner circle as a place of privilege, power, and authority over the people, which to some degree it was. However, more crucial elements of ministry, service, and love were in dire need of refocus. We can see the disciples' sense of entitlement when they asked Jesus to send the people away to find food for themselves. Jesus, in effect, says, I know you're tired, hungry, and deserve rest, but it is you that needs to feed these people, so buckle up. Jesus teaches the disciples his ministry operates differently than the Pharisees. The men and women who assume ministry positions in the body cannot use their positions of authority to serve selfish interests. They must maintain an attitude of humility and sacrifice, remembering that they are there to serve, not the other way around. The weaker members in our body are our customers, and we're the clerk assigned to serve them spiritually. They aren't a burden. They're the reason we're here. They are the ones who need our service the most. They may seem to be weaker, but they are actually God's gift to us. In fact, God uses them in our lives to teach us we will gain far more from serving the weaker members than they receive from our service. Pondering this, we see it's that to give is to receive lesson again. The takeaway, Jesus outfits us by testing us, and ministry is work. Even supernatural ministry is work. This may come as a surprise to some who think Jesus' main goal is to make your life easier. But no, he wants to make your life better. He does this through teaching us to love and serve one another and put others first despite your position of importance, hard circumstances, or lacking resources. 3, our God is a God of order and process. Jesus gave instructions on how to feed the people. Jesus didn't just slam down a massive pile of fish and bread and let the people have at it. Instead, he had the people sit in groups of 50 and made the disciples deliver food to them after they got it from Jesus. This is a model for church and also an example of how important order is to serving and fulfilling needs. 4, let nothing be wasted and do not hoard. Even though this was a supernatural ministry, we can assume many of the people didn't know where or how the food was being procured. The disciples came and gave each person their dinner, so to speak, like good waiters. For all the people knew, the food may have been bought or received by some other means. Regardless, the food was not wasted, miracle bread or not. No one was given the opportunity to hoard it or waste it. The food was blessed by Jesus and treated with respect as such. 5, Jesus is proving he is Messiah. Remember when Moses fed the Jews manna in the desert after crossing the Red Sea? Here we see Jesus do the same thing. Jesus feeds the Jews bread in a desolate place after crossing Galilee. This is a reenactment and the fulfillment of prophecy Moses speaks in Deuteronomy. This again speaks to the incredible typology reinforcing Jesus' claim as Messiah. How does this help the disciples? By reminding them that Scripture is perfect and useful and God's word always comes to pass. 2 Timothy 3:16. All Scripture is breathed out by God and profitable for teaching, for reproof, for correction, and for training in righteousness, that the man of God may be complete, equipped for every good work.
Thank you, David.
Tough times on the Sea of Galilee. For the disciples, boot camp turned into Navy SEALs hell week. In addition to that, their commander-in-chief was gone. The disciples were on their own, on a boat, in a storm, in the middle of the night. Mark tells us it was the 4th watch of the night, between 3 and 6 a.m. This meant the disciples had been rowing for 6 to 7 hours against the wind and waves for a journey that ordinarily would take a couple hours. All this after they played waiter for 5,000 men, in addition to an undisclosed number of women and children. And they did that after they were already exhausted from coming from their first healing and teaching crusade. maybe, just maybe, they were a bit bitter. Maybe they thought instead of being met with reward for doing so good, spreading the word, we were put to work like
I've
slaves.
felt that way so many times.
And
bro.
now Jesus instructed his disciples to return to Capernaum at night by boat without him, which was more than a little strange. First, because generally speaking, people didn't travel at night by boat across Galilee. It was dangerous. Second, there doesn't seem to be any compelling reason to leave at that moment. Thirdly, Jesus chose not to travel with the disciples, knowing this this is the only boat they have. With this picture in our heads, maybe, just maybe, the disciples were confused, tired, angry, and feeling a teensy-wincy bit underappreciated. And maybe Jesus sets the whole thing up to remind the disciples that this ministry thing is not about them. It's about him. Okay, that is a lot of maybes, and this is a Bible study, so let's check what we do know. We know Jesus was able to walk on water and calm the sea, not the disciples. The disciples had no power of their own. The text tells us Jesus was walking past the disciples. Jesus didn't need a boat to get to Capernaum, and the storm wasn't slowing his progress. Jesus would have made it over Galilee, no problem. The disciples, on the other hand, were having serious trouble. Again, Jesus is showing the disciples it was they who needed him. The solo boating trip for the disciples was Jesus' plan. We know Jesus had purpose in putting the disciples in such circumstances. He wanted them to grow. Peter sinks and is then brought back to the surface by Jesus' hand. Again, the disciples are the dependent ones. This is an immense richness of teaching we can pull from these experiences. Disciples or not, remember, we are all disciples and will go through similar circumstances. The more we internalize Scripture, the more emboldened we will be when the storm hits. Hopefully, we will remember all the times we were brought through and cared for by our Almighty Father and King, and give the glory where the glory is due. For further study, try reading the feeding of the 5,000 and the storm in all four Gospels. It's an awesome experience and gives us more understanding of why there are four Gospel accounts.
Yeah. You know, I thought in this notes I covered the faith thing, because everybody, when they read the part about Peter not having enough faith, they're like, you know, it becomes this, do I have enough faith? How do I get more faith? You know, and then they read all the miracles, and Jesus is like, because of your faith, you are healed. And it can cause people to start to want to understand, like, what is faith? Can I get more of it? Is this something like, do I have a gas tank of faith that needs to be filled? Is this like an energy that I am cultivating and can have control over? You know, these questions are pretty serious, especially when you read that kind of stuff. What do you guys think about faith? How it can be explained?
How it can be, I think we have notes.
We do. I mean, I was going to pull them out, but I have this.
What
talk.
chapter was that? Because we did, I know we talked about faith in
Well, let's find it. I mean, this is, I think it's in the next, let me take a look at 15 and see what we got in there.
See, the one thing that I've never really thought of, I've thought of faith as more of a binary than a, like, something that would be the term. 'Cause I think it's kind of like a weird thought to think, like, if I would have had 10% more faith, like me
There we
praying for this
go.
person, they would have been healed.
Yes.
Like there was some metric you didn't hit in your faith, you know,
Yes.
0 to 100. And to me, that just sounds, it would just leave you always second guessing yourself a bit.
Mhm. Well, you see, in the story of Peter, I don't know where it is, but I'm going to have to try and practice my memory right now. And you guys can help me as I piece this together. So I agree with you, Mike. I think that it is a sort of binary situation. There's a beautiful quote by this woman where she says, if you have faith, you have faith enough. So in the story with Peter, what's interesting is he looks at the waves and he's distracted by the waves. So that is a mini picture of the way faith works. If you have your eyes on Christ, you have faith, right? It's like your faith is on. It's not like you have a lot of faith or a little bit of faith. You just have faith. But if your attention is outside of Christ, you're no longer walking in faith at that time, right? Because the circumstances define your life. And then what does Peter do? He becomes afraid, right? So God tells us to fear him and fear him alone. And the fear of God is the beginning of wisdom, which pays back into that faith. So I'm acting in wisdom by paying attention, putting God first, no matter what storm I'm in. And that's the whole point, is storms are very good at getting your attention. There's always thunder, rain. You can't see very well. There's a lot of things that play on your senses that are trying to get your senses to make you afraid to react in one way or another. And so that's a perfect little sort of parabolic story to say, even in those times, you look for God. And the interesting thing is Peter set himself up for it. He said, if you're God, right? So he's like, put me out here. I know you can do this. So Peter knew Christ had the power to make him walk. So it shows us that faith is hard to hang on to. Even if before you step out, like Peter knew, it was still really hard for him to keep focused.
Maybe that's the concept, is the endurance of the binary.
Right. Keeping focus. I mean, ultimately, if you look at it from the perspective of attention, it starts to make more sense, right? So attention is what defines you. So if you're looking at the boogie monster, and he's scaring you, you're frozen, right? So when you begin to plan outside of the fear, you are becoming more in control over that fear. So if you have faith in God, he is instructing you, because he has the power over the wind. He has the power over the boogeyman, whatever there is that you're fearful of. So the struggle is, to keep faith, you have to know Christ and know where to look and keep your eyes on it. So how do you do that? How do you encourage the perspective that is Christ outside of the fear of, the storm or whatever boogeyman's out there?
I think ultimately, like, the endurance, like, I kind of view that's like I was just thinking about what we read in Matthew 24 last time.
Mm-hmm.
About the virgins with the oil and the ones without the
25,
oil.
yep.
And like, that story is a little bit not telling a faith story necessarily, but like, their problem was they couldn't endure the delay of Christ coming back.
Mm-hmm.
So then they kind of had to, they missed him.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is probably a lot of what this has to do with. This is the storm you're going through. Like, are you going to endure? How long will you endure?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think we all can sit and oh yeah, went through that whatever a week, but it might be 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
Or you hear about the stories of people praying for decades for someone.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, well, that person's faith remained on that whole time.
Mm-hmm.
They ultimately knew God. Like, their doubt wasn't there on God being able to do it. It's just realizing it's God's timing on doing it.
Right. There's a really cool part of Peter's story that just hit me, and that was that when he was actually not connected to Christ, so he was by himself on the water, it wasn't enough for him to persevere. He couldn't endure it by himself. When he was connected with Christ by the hand, he was able to endure. So that speaks to the verse of, Christ is my strength. God is I am weak. In my weakness, he is strong. Right. So in Peter recognizing he could not have faith outside of union with Christ, that gives you an idea of how to persevere and endure. So what does it mean? It means to find Christ and keep Christ throughout your day with your attention, right? You will never have the
persistent
strength. Persistent pursuit. Yeah. A certain desperation and knowledge of that pursuit.
I like the quote where you said, if you have faith, that's faith enough. That's what you said, right? Because I'm reminded of Jordan Peterson was asked, I think it was his wife asking it, and she was like, if you could have a superpower, what would you have? And he said, my superpower would be faith. And then she said, what would you do with that? And he said, I would move mountains. And I almost think he's selling himself a bit short there, because I agree with you where it's there's not a bucket of faith that you have to build up. Because like I think with like what Jordan Peterson does, it's like, dude, like you're already in kind of what you're doing, like you're moving mountains in a sense. And so
You know what I always said to that point is that it's easier to move a mountain than to move a man's heart. Get enough dynamite, you could blow that mountain up. Just a matter of money and dynamite to move a man's heart, and that's what Jordan's doing. So I get your point, dude. I think he is selling himself short.
Yeah, and it's like, I don't know. I agree with the like you either have faith or you're just not really pursuing it, and so you're not going to really, I guess, reap the benefits of it in a sense. And so, and someone in his position, it's like, dude, just dive in. So
I look at Abraham too as the Jewish nation. The sons of Abraham, they credit Abraham as having faith. And it's like, well, how does that work in? What is Abraham famous for? Being the man to sacrifice his only son, that God's promise and covenant was dependent on his son to procreate and make sons as many as the sands of the seas and the stars in the sky, right? And so what that tells me is it's an obvious like surrender of rationality. Like how a lot of times faith is just like Peter walking on the water. That makes no sense. You should not be able to stand on water. Abraham killing the son that's supposed to be the progenitor of all of his sons to come makes no sense. But it's the only action that properly distributes humility before God and says, I actually do fear you, God. Like, actually, this makes no sense to my little rational, rat brain, but I'm going to do it anyway. Therein lies the difficulty, is self-denial and self-humiliation. And then God can, be God. And then you can leave the next time you enter into a faith test and you're confronted with your own rationality, and it's tough. The faith comes through for you because you're one with Christ. You know that the voice you're hearing, because that's the struggle, is this voice Christ? Or is this decision, that's the hard part we all face. Should I do this? Should I do that? God, he's not going to answer all those questions for you outright. You have to have faith. There's going to be little, chunks of it missing. So another part that helps, I think, define faith is the difference between faith, trust, and belief. So they're all category. Those three words sort of are used interchangeably. And oftentimes they're shoehorned into a place that they're not supposed to be because, we're just trying to talk. And I am such a deep offender of using terms in a horrible way just to try and communicate something. But it's good to know how they're different, right? So what do you guys think is the difference between trust, belief, and faith?
We went over this in notes.
We did.
I'm like,
let's have some fun. Let's try and get through.
Remember exactly.
Come on, man. We went over twice.
I feel like the belief side of things, like I refer back to the I think I just read it with something Paul said about like even the angels believe in God and Jesus. Like so it's just it's almost an intellectual acknowledgement of God or whatever you're quote believing in. It's not necessarily changing your actions or I guess that's
good. So belief is something you can choose to engage in, right? You have a choice to believe. It doesn't hold a lot of like I can choose to believe that there's starving kids in Africa or not. Depending on, it doesn't matter if there's evidence or like I can choose to do that. So it's different than trust, because trust, you're kind of just as a sentient, conscious being, you're stuck with trust. Like you're applying trust to some degree or another based on your experience with whatever's in question. So if it's my truck, I trust my truck to start up every morning because I have it fueled. I have new batteries in it. I've done my oil changes. I have a pretty high level of trust that my old Duramax is going to start.
Trust is based on past experience.
Right. So trust is qualified and calibrated by your past experiences with whatever's in question. And you have no choice. You're constantly evaluating that. It's a constant evaluation. Like, you constantly have to put either a lot of trust or no trust in something.
You're trusting
As
other
a-
people are going to obey the traffic laws you're obeying.
Right. You're not, it's not a choice. You
Mhm.
have to trust as a conscious being. Like, you're stuck with that. Belief, you can kind of decide to or not. Faith stands out because it's a term exclusive to God, a form of God, divinity. You put that in the divine. You put your faith in the divine. You can only put your faith in a divine, in a God. You can only put your faith in a God. And so that, I think, really informs us as to what it is. It's a relationship with God. That is what faith is. So that's where it stands differently. So it's like, do I believe in God? Is that enough? No, it's not enough. Do I trust in God? No, that's good. God's come through for you and you trust in God, but it's also not, it's not complete the way faith is complete. Do I have faith in God? Oh, now what happens when you have faith in God? It will be what? Tested.
Mm-hmm.
It will be tested. You will be tested if you have faith. You will be tested if you have faith. And it's a good thing when you're tested. So,
Yeah,
faith.
that's how I see it. Comes back to like the endurance of it. Like, it worked. Peter had faith for a moment, and then something, the storm came up. He had doubt,
Mhm.
and I think that's where I was thinking, like, how can we give some practical examples of what
Yeah.
today's world looks like with faith?
Yeah.
And I like, one thing that comes to mind for me is like, like when you're trusting, or when you're praying to God for people's salvation, like, you have faith that He's going to come through on that.
Mhm.
I think, like, like when I hear of somebody that had like kind of a radical finding of Jesus, like I remember I was asking a girl recently who came to Christ, and I was like, do you know, like, did you have people praying for you? And like, every time it's always yes. Like, my
Mhm.
grandma was praying for me for years and
Mhm.
years, or my dad, or whatever. And I view like those people endured in their faith,
Mhm.
even though they weren't getting results for a long time.
Jeez, yeah. Yep. Endurance and perseverance, that is like, what's practical ways to develop that? Think about that grandma. She's praying every day in the morning out of love because she knows the brokenness of her daughter or whoever, her grandbaby. She's doing that because she knows God loves that grandbaby more than she does. She knows that because she has faith in God, that faith and love she knows the scriptures say God desires all people to be saved. So she's praying already in line with what God desires for his child. So I think a practical way for people to start to really have a relationship with God, because that's what faith is, so you can endure and persevere when your tests of faith come, is to begin to self-persecute and self-humiliate. So this is a problem that Peter had, right? He was very type A, right? He had to be humbled in real time by Jesus and be sort of humiliated by Jesus to get the lesson, right? But that's not the way it always has to be. God doesn't always have to discipline you. You can do work so that you'll be better at persevering and enduring, better at having faith in the hard times. And the ways you do that are by putting the flesh in submission, praying for longer than, say, 15 minutes at a time. Try praying for 30 minutes at a time. Try putting away your fasting. So put away your Instagram, your social media, put away like the dopamine punches in your life, put them away and replace them with God. See how that works, right? That's what Jesus did with the 40 days. So if you want to endure your time of faith, you're going to realize, if you're being honest with all the stories that we have to draw from, it's going to bring you right to the brink of giving up, right? Like, that's what a true test of faith is. So it is.
Is that testing your, like, I don't really see that as that's testing your own willpower and self-control, not your faith in God, though.
Well, I think if you know God, right? So like, there's parts about God you'll never know, but usually he's testing you on things you should know by that point in time. Like, it says that he's never going to tempt you or test you beyond your, like, he wants you to succeed. The way that works out sometimes is unknown to us.
Yeah.
But like, a test of faith, I think, is always there so you'll grow.
Well, I think you, if you really analyze your life, like the more you're involved with people, the more you're going to be tested
Yeah.
with your faith. Like you're going to have people in your life, especially like when we talk about, like, you know, the ministry part of Jesus feeding the 5,000, we always go back to like, you know, Christians love to cop out on that by, oh, I went on a mission trip to Africa and got
Yeah.
my missionary work done. It's like, how about we start in the people God put in your life,
Mhm.
and they're going to test your faith.
That's right,
You're going to
man.
be praying for them for years. You're going
Yeah.
to be working on them for years.
Yeah.
You're going to get, they're going to hurt you.
Yep.
You're going to feel like no progress is made. I'm shooting rubber bullets at the tank.
Yep. Oh yeah.
And so I think like if you just look, you can find your tests of faith just by in the people around you.
Mhm.
And you should view them as like God put them in my life to evangelize to them, but also like to have faith in God, to see his work in their life.
Mhm. Like a test of faith is different than being persecuted, right?
Mhm.
They're different things. Like you're gonna be persecuted by Satan trying to kill you and your soul and bring you to hell. Like he wants to murder you. That's persecution. But a test of faith is generally administered by your father. He wants you to grow. So it's like a test of discipline. It's an ongoing experience that we have because it reminds us of how real God is. It helps us, like you were saying, to be desperate and dependent on him and prevent us from keeping God in a box or not growing, you know? So I love that story of Peter, man. You know, you see Peter, he like wants to believe that Jesus can do this. He's believing, he has faith. Like, I know if you are, it's like a test. He's testing God and then he gets tested right immediately next.
Mhm.
You know, and generally speaking, it's not a good idea to test God because sometimes he answers. He answers hardcore.
Well, and a lot of times you'll be put in a place of humility, which
Yeah.
might be what you need in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah.
'Cause I know that's when I see a lot of things, and hey, this is on me too. Like when I see a lot of ways people act and stuff, I mean, everything's out of pride. It
Mm,
seems like. And
self-righteous.
so like, yeah, when your faith is tested, it puts you in a humble place for sure.
Mm-hmm. That's another thing, isn't it? Pride always hides, man. It's almost like you do have to be humble to look for it, man. Jeez. I remember my dad telling me, he's like, you know, some of the most broken people are the most prideful.
Mhm.
I was like,
Mhm.
what do
Yep.
you mean, man? I was like, you know, a kid, because I'd look at like, you know, these guys that I thought were prideful and be like, they just always look like they're having the best time. They must be cocky and prideful. It's like, no, dude. Some of these broken people are hanging on to their pain so much out of pride, you know, because they don't want to expose their brokenness or whatever's going on. Yeah. And that'll prevent you from having faith, won't it? You know, your faith must be tested. A man must be tested. There must be a rite of passage. This is the way things are done. It is not good enough to just say, I have faith. It must be tested. You
Mhm.
have to go through these tests. So preparing for that is having a walk. Like if you know your faith test is coming and it's going to bring you to your knees and you're not going to know what to do with it and you're going to be totally dependent on God, you might feel every kind of horrible feeling ever, like Abraham murdering his son bad. Like that's pretty bad, bro. I can't think of a lot of things worse than that. It's horrifying, murdering your own child. Wouldn't that be like, okay, I gotta find a way to serve I gotta be connected with service. I gotta be connected with Christ because that time is coming. Like Jordan Peterson does say, it's like there'll be a time in your life where you may get sick or you may lose a family member or it may all happen at once. What will you do? And
Did you
he's
say,
right.
like every 5 years,
Yeah.
you're gonna go through some
You're
crap.
gonna go through some crap. You better be ready.
What makes me think of that song, that common or famous song from I think Casting Crowns, "Praise You in the Storm."
Oh yeah.
And I
Good
think
one.
like that's, you know, a good, I would say, test or like concept along with this is like when you are in the storm, how are you treating God?
Mhm.
And then how are you treating God when everything was great? Because that's a lot of times when people forget about God and
Yeah.
their pursuit of God is like
Dude,
on
they
the back
just-
burner.
Yeah, because everything.
And then it's like the storm's here, and
Mm-hmm.
then now it's like, God help,
Yeah.
help.
Yeah.
And then if that's how you're treating God, you know, you got to ask yourself, where is your faith? Like, I mean, it's good that you realize God can he's there, he can solve problems for you. But it's like when everything's going well, what about your relationship with God is
Mhm.
making you put him on the back burner?
You're just missing out on the joy part. You're missing out on the reverence part, on the worship part. I think because we're so prideful, Dave, when we go through that transition as new believers, we're like, what does it mean to worship? Like, you think about this childlike idea of worship, like rooting for your favorite football team or whatever comes to mind, because worship's a strange term. It's not something you understand, coming from the world we live in. I mean, we worship, all right. We worship celebrities. We worship football. That's what you've got to go for. But if you're putting your worship in Christ, it feeds back to you. Unlike the football game or something like that, it's a sustained high. It is what allows you to have joy in the storm. Like,
Mhm.
that is what we have. Why do we have that? Because Christ is our strength, right? He's the guy who's sustaining us. So worship is a way to stay out of pride, right? Worship is a way to endure, right? How do you endure? Is it all about like being Samson and pushing down the pillars and just blowing hernias out all the time? No, it's not. It's about enjoying your life with Christ, in a way that people look at you and they're like, God, we're all dying in this storm and Christ is asleep. It's the ontological, to use a nice big fat word that makes a lot of people scratch their heads. It's the spiritual description of fulfillment that they see in your life. But yeah, so that's why we encourage you guys in these Bible studies to have them, to think about them, so you're prepared for those tests of faith. Because it's strange the way God will test you. Peter got tested after a long day's worth of work. They were probably just beat dead, tired in a storm, and sometimes that's the way it is, bro. Doesn't mean God doesn't love you. It just means that he thinks a lot of you and wants you to be stronger than you think you are, so take courage, endure, persevere. That is what it says in Revelation, to endure. He who endures and perseveres, to him it will be given. So you can do that with worship. So you can do that with praise. You can do that with joy. You can do that outside of the worldly paradigm of suffering, right?
Mhm.
I was actually watching this. I thought it was such a cool quote. So you guys heard about the show, The Fall of House Usher?
No.
It's a Netflix show. It's like a weird soft horror series. It's actually an Edgar Allan Poe thing that they used to make it. And the guy is like a mogul, like he owns this pharmaceutical company that's like killing all these people because it's like a highly addictive, opioid. And at the end of the movie, he's like, there's no such thing as a painkiller. You can't kill pain. And it was so cool because he's right. Like, everybody who tried to kill their pain would be addicted. Like their lives would go straight to hell real fast. And it's like, I just love the quote so much because it's like, only thing you can do is have pain have purpose. You're not escaping it.
Mm-hmm.
And your test of faith is going to be painful. Like, there's no escaping it, you
Nope.
know? But it's
Nope.
good for you.
Well, Will, let's see. He's needed to hear this today, guys. Will, thanks for joining us. If hit us up if you have any thoughts on this. And
Wise man, Will, I know you do.
as far as what's next, we're going to be going on a podcast Thursday called Let's Talk Relationships. It won't be a live stream. It'll be aired. I think she releases it later. So that's being filmed Thursday. I don't know when it'll be live. We'll post it for you guys. And
That's going to be like a dating talk, right?
yeah, we're chatting tomorrow on like
so this chick's
the
like
actual topic. So we'll
so you
find out.
All right.
I don't
Yeah.
really know. We were just invited.
I watched an excerpt of it. It was definitely dating hard.
Well, yeah. I mean,
Going
it's
into the
called-
woman's mind.
Yeah. Putting on my seatbelt for that one.
Heck yeah.
And if you have any thoughts on Matthew, leave it in the comments. I saw one of you guys commented on like one of our earlier Matthew topics with some great thoughts. That was great because we're just here digging in, and we don't have all the answers. We're not theology experts, but we want to encourage you guys to have these same conversations with your friends too. So
Yeah.
make it happen.
Yeah. Poke around, man. Have fun.
But yeah, you can.
Thanks for joining us tonight. We love you guys.
Yeah, thank you guys.